like to introduce you all to my friend John. He recently reached out to me through YouTube wanting to share his story. And we talked a little bit about it, but I really haven't heard all of it yet. And he's going to share it with all of us now. But if I could just get a little bit of your background, John. How long were you one of Jehovah's Witnesses?
So I was witness. I've been a witness since birth. My parents were both witnesses. Grandparents on both sides of the family are witnesses. Aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone's witness in my family on both sides, pretty much, except for like maybe 2 or 3 people.
Okay. And then how many years were you in it?
So I was in it until I was almost 24 years old. I'm 35 now.
24 years, and then where and then did you start having questions?
I mean, that's a very interesting question. I think that, like many people I've heard so far, I think I've kind of had doubts since I could probably read and write. There have always been things that never quite added up, whether it was doctrinally or whether it had to do with like maybe issues of creation or some of the Bible stories really, really true. I think I've kind of always had doubts. I would say they really started to come to a head while I was at Bethel. That's when kind of everything kind of came together. But I always considered myself like a reading rainbow kid. That was one of my favorite shows growing up. And at the end of every show, LeVar Burton would always say, you don't have to take my word for it. In other words, read the book for yourself.
Yeah.
And I was kind of raised that way too. Academics was very important in my family. Doing well in school was very important. But solving your own problems was also very important in my family. So I would ask my mom and dad a question. They may know the answer, but to them it was always look it up.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that was the biggest reason why those doubts started to come to a head right around my early 20s. Right. Because I just started looking it up. You know, that's a big part of it.
Yeah, they try to teach you to value truth, but as soon as it deviates from their truth, there's a problem.
Correct.
Could you talk a little bit about your experience at Bethel? Was there, I mean, I'm sure there was a lot of good, and you can talk about that if you want, but was there anything odd about it or that struck you as a little strange when you were there?
So my experience at Bethel was really, really good. I probably shouldn't have gone to Bethel because by the time I went, I was already having serious doubts. I feel like I had a perfect storm of things. I was in love with a girl who was not. She had grown up around witnesses, but was not a witness herself. My father had a serious illness that he got my last year of high school. That slowly deteriorated over time. So I saw him suffering more and more. He kept having stroke after stroke after stroke until he passed away right before or right after I got this fellowship. So I had serious doubts as to theodicy, why does God permit suffering, and then also what does love really mean? When you're really in it, it changes things a little bit. But my Bethel experience was great. I would say the experience of Bethel was great. I had no problems with it. I worked in the press room. I worked in Brooklyn. I was there in 2001 when the Twin Towers fell. I was there. I actually saw them falling. I saw one of the planes hit. The brothers there were awesome. I mean, I really enjoyed the work that I did there. It was the first time I really had worked with my hands, being a city guy. And so the experience of like working in the press and webbing it out or blowing it up, you know, the first 20 times I tried to do it, paper and ink flying everywhere, those were great experiences. I always cherish those. The biggest issues for me were when reading the Bible for the first time all the way through by myself, for myself, really, really was what started to bring everything together. I really started to question, do I really believe that all of this is true?
Yeah.
And studying, and there's several libraries all over Brooklyn, Bethel. I'm not sure about the farm, but there's several libraries everywhere. And in the reasoning book, when it comes to the flood story, it mentions how there are other flood stories or myths about the same occurrence as a reason why the biblical story is true. And so when you start to research that, I ended up reading the Epic of Gilgamesh while at Brooklyn Bethel. Wow. And realizing, like, wait a minute here, like something is really, really wrong. How can, if the way I reasoned in my mind at the time was Abraham came out of Ur, which is basically Babylon, which means Babylon was already a city while Abraham is still living in tents. There was no Israelites yet. None of that stuff existed yet. So which story is more likely to be the original? Right. And which story is most likely to be copied? And that's, at the time, that's how I was reasoning it. And this was very, very, very troubling to me.
I would imagine.
So troubling that at morning worship, which is, I probably should not have done this. In morning worship, those who don't know, in Bethel, there's a Bethel head and a Bethel end. The Bethel head is always at your table. The Bethel head is always one of the most seniority there. And when you're first there, when you're new, you typically sit at one end or the other, close to either brother who has seniority. So I sat closest to the Bethel end, and I asked him a question. It ended up going around the table, and my question was literally around, this is very, very troubling to me. I'm reading a story where if I take out Noah and put in Utnapishtim, I mean, right. I'm looking at the same story. There's doves flying out of the ark, there's animals on the ark, it's the same story. And I'm like, what is going on here? And it wasn't just troubling to me, I apparently upset the whole table. So much so that when I got back to my room that evening, 2 Bethel elders who I worked with in the press room were at my door, ready to talk to me about beware of my independent thinking. And that right there took me down a path of discovery. For the very first time in my life, I wanted to know. It was the truth for myself. My question was, why do I believe what I believe?
Yep.
And that led me down a path, man, that you can take that path so many ways. You could look at evolution versus creation. You could look at philosophical, Bertrand Russell or Robert Ingersoll. You could look at it through the prism of why does God permit suffering? I ended up over the next 3 years going down them all.
Yes.
Right. In a search for truth, essentially. And largely I did that by myself. I wasn't as savvy on the internet then as I am now. I didn't consider myself an apostate. I wasn't angry at witnesses. I just wanted to know what's true for myself.
Yeah, man.
Of course, the more you read and the more you realize, the more you study, the more you realize how much you don't know. So I had walked around my whole life thinking I knew what happened when people died, thinking I knew why there was suffering and sickness in the world, thinking I knew what was the best course of life, what was the best way to live, and realizing that I don't know anything, nothing. That to me made me very depressed and very angry.
So I just have a thought there. It's a very humbling experience to go through what you just described, and that is not how a Jehovah's Witness sees it. They see it, what you did, as the height of arrogance and evidence of pride, because the people at the helm of the Jehovah's Witness organization have figured it all out, and you show your humility by saying, okay, I accept all of it. But it takes...
Yeah, I mean, that's very, very frustrating. When I
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, I'm sorry. When I got back home from Bethel, I was there for like a little over a year. Apparently, I don't know what happened, but the brothers, my elders that I was familiar with back home, they definitely talked to me a lot more. They definitely hovered around me a lot more. I definitely was in a second school. I had never been in second school before. A lot more. So I don't know what was in my file, but clearly it was something. And I just had more questions, and what was very frightening to me, very creepy to me, was everyone just kept telling me basically to shut up, just go along with it, it'll all work out, don't rock the boat, this kind of thing. And that was very hurtful to me because I had a father who was basically dying slowly, and my whole entire family believed this is true. And from what I saw at Bethel, and from what I had been reading for myself, I knew I didn't fully have a grasp of it as I do now, but I knew something was not right. And so what I did was I didn't know to reach out to former witnesses. I didn't think about it that way. I just started to rebel. I started to hang out more. I would miss meetings. I let my beard grow. I just went out dating. She became my fiance years later. I just started to separate my life almost to the point where I was literally two different people.
Yeah.
I was one way because I wanted to please my parents and my grandparents and my cousins, and I was another whole way and I really just wanted to be free to think.
Yeah.
So I stopped being a pioneer. I stopped a lot of the witness activities. I just needed time to figure it out. That's how I felt at the time.
Right. So, do you want to talk about your exit process or how you got out? What I'm really interested to know is how you were treated through the exit process or after you left.
So how I got out was probably the worst. It was probably the worst. Everything came to a head. One thing I have to say though, my parents are pretty amazing, but especially my father. I mean, he is still the best man I've ever met in my life, and he was an elder. He was a presiding overseer. He was definitely the most loving and non-judgmental person I've ever met. And so he's paralyzed at this point from his neck down. He can only move his head and one arm. And I come home from Bethel, and I'm sharing these things with him because I am deeply troubled.
Yep.
And his response to me was not, "John, you should shut up. John, you're in your own way. You are, stupid. You're crazy." He was like, "I wish I was better so that I could study these things with you, but you are right to search the truth for yourself."
Wow. And
that, to me, was all I wanted to hear. At the same time, he said, "Don't tell your mother." So, as my mom is the exact opposite when it comes to those things. She really likes structure. She really likes security. She really likes assurance.
Yeah.
And risk is not something that she likes too much. And so my dad knew her very, very well. I didn't really understand why he said that until years later. But I want to mention that because watching him suffer and die, the way he died, just that by itself would lead you to question. Being in love with someone who is not a witness, I feel really bad now, but I really tried to. The brothers and my mom and my grandparents were really hard on her to get baptized and to become a publisher and to get on the talks, and they were always on me about it. And so I started to get on her about it, and I was really pushing her to do something that she wasn't comfortable doing. And now, at 35, I feel absolutely terrible about that. But at the time, I was like, look, can you just go to a meet? Like, can you just, become a publisher? They can get off my back. I love you love me. This is the truth. Let's just do it. But at the time, I was also having doubts, and so I feel horrible about that because I was trying to please everyone and could not. So being in love with someone who was not in the truth, watching my father become ill, and having studied the little bit I had already studied, led to the perfect storm. Something's gonna give. And essentially, it was me. I just said, I committed. I didn't really commit fornication. I guess you would call it porneia.
Sure.
And I wasn't repentant. I just wanted a break. So I was like, look, whatever you want to think it is, that's what it is. I don't want to deal with you guys anymore. God shared some really tough scriptures with me before I left. He shared a scripture with me that's basically what Jesus says. On the outside, it's you're a whitewashed grave, and the inside is full of dead bones. And the last scripture that was shared with me before I walked out the back door of the kingdom.
Wow.
And then a month later, my father died. So going back, my mom calls me, lets me know my dad has died. And I walk into the house, and my family is probably one of the preeminent families in all of Baltimore, Maryland, probably Maryland itself. So the house is full of witnesses.
Sure.
And everyone turns their back on me.
Wow.
And walk out of my dad's room, and it's just me and him by myself. And I walk out by myself. At the funeral, most friends ignored me, but some friends were polite, and there was a couple who said some very mean things. I'll never forget this one brother saying, like, I guess this is what it took for you to wake up to come back. And to this day, I really want to punch him in the mouth. You know what I mean? Like, that's how I felt at that time. But when I got to my truck, I just started weeping because, it was just me by myself. my entire family, everyone is there, and there was no love or support for me as well.
Right.
And that damaged me for years. You know, that experience damaged me for years to come. And I didn't think to look on a website like yours or Cedars. I didn't start doing it until like maybe a year and a half ago. I hadn't engaged in that way. I never considered myself an apostle. I guess I would consider myself that now, but I didn't think of it that way. I really just wanted to know the truth. So for a while, I just left that behind and decided to just throw myself into work, and got engaged. Ended up in the financial crash. Ended up losing everything. I was in banking, and I lost my business. I lost my house, lost my cars, and I lost that girl. She was gone as well. When the money left, she left, and it was just me by myself for a while. And it was at that point that I started thinking about coming back to the Kingdom Hall. It was at that point that I started to allow myself to study in depth. So I was going back to the meetings regularly. My family's really, really excited about it. And then there was one Watchtower article where they quoted a scholar. It was about Moses. And they quoted this guy, this preeminent scholar named Nahum Zarna. And since in the past I had read the Watchtowers more skeptically, I decided to look this guy up. Let me just look up Nahum Zarna and see if his scholarship would support anything the Watchtower would say.
Yeah. And
of course, it's the exact opposite of what the Watchtower.
Right.
None of his findings would support any Christian belief for that matter. Right. You know, and that was it for me. That I was done right there because I knew they were being disingenuous, and it also means that there are people at Watchtower who know what scholarship says.
Yeah.
They know what the archaeology says. They know these things. It was basically trying to link the story of Moses and try to anchor it in some type of facts, archaeological facts or findings. And you know, Nahum Zarna, not only is he a preeminent scholar, but he's also an older scholar. So they quoted someone who's long dead, where the scholarship has advanced.
Right, of course.
But when you look at his whole body of work, I mean, he's reporting the facts as he found them in the evidence at that time, and none of that would support anything that I was raised to believe.
Right.
At that point, I was done.
I'm not familiar with that example. I'm going to have to look it up, and I'll put it in the description below because it's that's a new one to me. And I don't remember encountering it on the page on JW Facts for misquotes, deception, and lies, but this is just one of many examples like this. The most recent one I know of is 2015. There was a cover series on creation where they misquoted a scientist, and he wrote an open letter to the Awake and said, this is not what I said, and they ended up taking it out. So if you look at the digital version of it now on Watchtower Online, it's different than what was in the printed copy. They had to take out his quote.
Yeah, I think that there's a more recent Watchtower, maybe a few months old, where the Watchtowers, those guys are a little bit even more insidious than that, in my opinion. So there's one recently where they quote a prominent scholar, Bart Ehrman, but they just say there's a scholar out here who says this, basically that the Bible is not historically accurate. The only reason I know that quote is because I read his books.
Yeah.
Then they quote another scholar in quotes, and they name him Bruce Metzger, who is a conservative Christian scholar. Still wouldn't. His findings are still, I would say, pretty factual. Wouldn't support it, but they're like, oh, it's a conservative Christian scholar. He at least believes in the inerrancy of the Bible, so we'll quote this guy.
Sure.
The other guy, they don't put his quotations in quotes, nor do they say who said it. You know, which I think is even more insidious because as a witness, I'm reading the Watchtower as if it is true, as if the Watchtower has sourced all its facts, and it still angers me to this day because my family, for the most part, believes everything that they say, hook, line, and sinker.
Wouldn't you love to sit down with some of the guys in the writing department or the writing committee and figure out or ask them how they're justifying this? Like, what's going on inside their mind when they're doing things like that in their literature?
Man, I don't know how they do that. My only thing I can think of, there's so many leaks that come out of Watchtower though seem to come from so high up. There's got to be a couple guys in there that do know and are just simply trying to help out in another way. You know, keep some flow of information coming out so people can know about it. Right. I think that's a part of it too. But anyone who's read Bart Ehrman or Nathan Zarner or even Bruce Metzger would know that, boy, there's a whole lot here that I was never taught. And I think that was my biggest thing.
Yeah. Okay, so how long ago was it that your dad passed away?
So my dad passed away when I was in 2004.
2004. So it's been 12 years. And when did you start looking at maybe going back to the Kingdom Hall?
2008, almost 2009.
2008.
And I did that for like a year. Yeah, a year and a half. Like I was just really going to meetings. Didn't write a letter or anything like that. I just really wanted to go back. And I just think I wanted to go back because it's home. It was the lowest point in my life, and I just wanted some comfort. You know, I think that's why.
Yeah, when you hold somebody's family hostage like that, pretty powerful motivation to come back.
Yeah, and at that point too, I would say I'm pretty much homeless. Like I slept on a park bench a couple times, and then some friends took me in, and I was going from friend's house to friend's house. I asked my mom, of course she said no. So I was pretty much on my own as I was trying to build my business back up. My wife now, different woman, I had gotten very, very ill, and there was no one to help me. I had been helping her in college. I never went to college, but I was helping her with the college homework. And I was really sick. I got really sick. Was rushed to the hospital. And her family, they lived about maybe an hour away from her college, literally took me into their house and nursed me back to help her. I was not her boyfriend or anything at the time. I was just a friend. And her father said, I'm doing this because I believe that this is my Christian duty.
Wow.
Now, that struck me. He was a man who was motivated by his faith to reach out to a total stranger to help heal this person who he did not know. All he knew is that, hey, his daughter's been getting straight A's since she met this guy. That's all he knew. Didn't know anything about me. Led me into his house, his wife, and nursed me back to help herself. I call her mom to this day, you know. And he said it was based on his reading of the scriptures.
Yep.
Now, wouldn't even consider myself. I believed in God, but I wouldn't consider myself. I had a lot of doubts at that time.
Sure.
But that led me to another very, very tough parallel. Like, how can a witness say for sure that their version of Christianity is true when this person's faith is just as strong as my mom's or dad's, right? Maybe even stronger, because I don't really see my dad would. I don't really see my mom like taking a stranger on the street. I just don't see that happen, you know. So what does that say? Later on, I had a roommate who was Muslim. He was from Saudi Arabia, and he believed in a very conservative Sunni Islam as deeply as I had once believed in witnesses. And so you have to say, okay, but you can't prove any of these things happened, Abdullah. You can't prove that he flew to Jerusalem on King's horse. You can't prove that. He was like, no, but that story is true because my faith says it so.
Right.
And if I went to my mom and said, but you can't really prove that sin came from two people eating a piece of fruit. How can you know what my faith says that is so? So now you come to a very, very tough dichotomy there. Okay, which one is true? And if so, how would I verify that one is true and not the other if the basis for both is faith? Right. How can I do that?
It shows how bad faith is faith as a method for coming to truth is not reliable.
Not reliable at all. And I struggled with that for what her dad said to me. I struggled with that as I was getting better. By 2010, I would say I was back on my feet. I started a new business. Was doing very, very well. But by this point, I'm dating his daughter, like seriously now. And I had new friends. I had new family. And for the first time, I would say in 5 years, I was normal. And I think really all I needed was like a family
Yeah, man.
unit. Love, like it's powerful. And once I had that, I flourished again. Like, the depression was gone. I didn't realize how depressed I was. I didn't realize I was depressed at all, put it that way. I didn't realize how lonely I was. I spent a few years practically by myself, and I'm very thankful to this day that I have, a new family. And it was at that point that